All right. Special Sunday night edition of Jazz Cabbage Cafe with Rick Thompson. And we have Amy Brown from ABKO Labs and Ryan Basor with Redemption Canna and Redemption Foundation. We will be joined by attorney Paul Tylenda and possibly some others. But I think this show is legitimate for letting our sponsors get some recognition.
Sure. Jamie Lowell is the host that you're listening to right now, folks.
So that's all true. Let's take a look at these guys.
Jazz Cabbage Cafe is sponsored by the Botanical Company, Redemption Cannabis, Real Leaf Solutions, the Detroit Nutrient Company, and GrowGreenMI.com.
Yep, we're coming up on a new year. Got to see who all wants to stick with us. Hope Redemption does.
Custom 420 promotions.
We're in.
Yeah, they does. I know that Grow Green definitely wants to come in and even do some more. So all good. We'll start another year soon and have at it. But tonight we're here primarily because of the massive recall and what some people are calling a scandal when it comes to their being. I want to say I've heard up to 2/3 of the flower product, 50 to 60% being taken off of the shelves because of unreliable testing. I don't think that anything was deemed necessarily contaminated, but the method of testing could not be confirmed to be accurate. So that stuff is considered just not tested basically at this point. And it requires 2 tests now to get back on the shelf. So there's a history here with the people involved with Viridis. Maybe we should start with that a little bit, going back to the state police labs.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be happy to start talking about that a little bit. And if anybody wants to chime in, feel free. But I became aware of this, and there's an excellent article, I think it's from 2014 in Leafly, that Sharmy recirculated recently, and I put it on my page also, and it kind of discusses this. And it's at its heart, it's just fraudulent testing that put a lot of people at high risk because of saying things such as, well, this concentrate could have been derived synthetically, so the origin is unknown, and so we're going to have to charge you for a felony. This came after like these synthetic cannabis bills were passed. And you got something to
Jimmy, you're referring to, first of all, let's clarify. The Michigan State Police Crime Lab was tasked with testing concentrates, and if you had concentrates that had a natural origin, a cannabis-based origin, that was not going to be crime-worthy, let's just call it. However, if
it's cannabis, yeah.
If the subject was indeterminate, then they could assume that it was synthetic cannabis, similar to K2 or spice. That could land you a felony. So the Michigan State Police collaborated with prosecutors and the Prosecuting Attorneys Association of Michigan in order to concoct test results that revealed results origin indeterminate, to allow them to still continue to treat cannabis concentrates as criminal items.
Right, yeah. Yeah, specifically origin unknown. And it's really fucked up because it says we don't know, but because we don't know, we're gonna have to charge you with the felony just to make sure. And that's not really how our system is supposed to work. Go ahead, Ryan.
I was gonna say, this is something that was you're right on, and even in the FOIAs that Michael Comorn was leading the charge on this, and it's in the articles. It's like even like the scientists at the state of Michigan were like, "What are you guys doing? This is gonna. What else do you guys think it's coming from? Like 99.9% of these concentrates are coming from marijuana. Why would you do this?" And it was Ken Stecker with Pam, who we've dealt with since I became aware of him. My first meeting with him was
that's the Prosecutors Association of Michigan. Yep.
Yep. And then and then they went around and shopped at the prosecutors, and especially the west side of state, a little more conservative. So they're going around charging felonies, raiding when it's legal, and they know it's legal, and taking away people's kids with CPS, and that's what it's infuriating. It's Greg Michaud, who's the owner of Viridis Labs. So like when I first heard that they were going for a lab, I heard about it, and I've been vocal about anyone that wants to listen to me about, do not test with these guys, and they don't deserve to be in the industry. And I've said it from day one. Like if I tested with, like, their name will never be on a redemption package. I've said that from day one. It's cost me deals. And the big thing is now, it's one of the worst kept secrets in Michigan. It's not a secret. If you want an extra 3 to 4 to 5% THC points on your flower, you go to Veritas. Like, there's a reason that they test 60% of the flower. Do you think people want to go with a bunch of dirty cops? No, they're like, oh, I needed the test results. So like the other thing that these guys are perpetrating is this myth that THC is more important than the terpenes, the cannabinoids. And they really hurt our market. And I'm disappointed finding out all the people I know.
Well, a lot of people still call it potency. And it's so ridiculous that all this stuff, all this major amounts of money and huge recall. I guess some people calling it a scandal. And there is an ongoing investigation. So we don't know all the answers to everything yet. And we're going to have to find out.
And here's something with human nature. So we know about it. This is just a great look inside of the state Michigan crime lab and the police that we've dealt with for years. This isn't something where like, oh, the cops just got retired and they started a business and then they just became corrupt. No, they've been used to it their whole career, covering each other's ass, doing whatever they wanted, just like the FOIA. They've gotten away with anything. This is business as usual. They're in shock that they would actually get in trouble for anything. Why can't they just do whatever they want and just have, like the good old boy network covered up at the state? And the thing is, too, they're contracted. They're testing still for the state of Michigan for other things. This is a big, like, state of Michigan needs to really. This is another black eye on the state of Michigan, and like rated last every year in government transparency. This is just another thing. So
in the FOIA emails, I just want to reiterate what Ryan was saying. The people there who were doing the testing were saying, no, this does come from the the origin is the biological plant. There wouldn't be all these other components showing up with it if that wasn't the case, or somebody did such an elaborate reproduction of these things synthetically and combined them that it made it completely unreasonable and not feasible to do it. And there's just no reason to believe that this is the case.
And what we're talking about with these FOIA documents, remember I mentioned that the Michigan State Police Crime Lab was working with the Prosecuting Attorneys Association to, I don't want to say the word fix, but to give favorable reports to prosecutors to make it more easy to charge people with crimes. That did not go without notice. And noted Michigan criminal defense attorney Michael Camoran and others launched their own private investigation into the Michigan State Police Crime Lab as they were defending clients that were jammed with this. And they did Freedom of Information Acts on the crime labs and found some very, exciting things in some of those emails from one lab person to another. One scientist saying, this is absolutely wrong. And the other scientist saying, yeah, but the prosecutors say this is what they need. So you looked behind the scenes of something that was supposed to be completely scientific and saw the trappings of politics and self-interest enter into a scientific arena where there should have been nothing except X's, O's, numbers, and graphs. I mean, Amy Brown has joined us from ABKO Labs.
Yeah,
we're supposed to just do science in the labs, right? We're not supposed to do politics in the labs.
100%. And best lab practice is that your staff doesn't even know what client the tests they're running are for. So it can't be, oh, I love this brand, I'm sure their THC is higher. You have to keep everything like very much anonymized, and that's the way you do effective lab testing. And in a slight nod of fairness to the state on that issue, very slight, but because it was definitely politically motivated. I will give them a little fairness on the science side, is that unlike, clinical labs, hospital labs, environmental labs, there is no federal rule book on how to test cannabis or test for cannabis. And every single day, more and more methods are approved for cannabis by international association, which just makes all of our science better. So in some ways, they may not have had the tools they needed at the time to actually tell if it was cannabis or artificially created cannabis, in which case maybe don't test for it if you can't tell the truth.
No, they did know. They did know.
Did they?
They did know. The emails
were
were
enough
I'm not
information.
familiar with that. Yeah.
No. So, no, all good. I appreciate you offering that up and trying to keep this balanced, because you know that we are about ready to attack these guys. We've not liked them for a long time, but we do want to make it clear that the investigation's ongoing and all the information in terms of the microbial stuff, the THC percentage, and that stuff's not like completely known of what's the issue here.
I was referring back to the case when it was the state crime lab on identifying artificial versus real cannabis. This issue is a totally different conversation. Science has come so much further than those older days, so that's a different conversation.
So if we proceed with history a little bit forward, those Michigan State Police Crime Lab guys, no one was ever charged with anything. They sort of cleaned up their act, but they just kept trucking. And what happened is we opened up the adult use laws here in Michigan and the medical marijuana laws in 2016 and licensed laboratories. And lo and behold, the scientists from the Michigan State Police Crime Lab decided they wanted to get into the cannabis testing industry and opened a lab called Viridis, Viridis. And shortly after they got open, they were docked by the Marijuana Regulatory Agency for about $2,500 fine for not following procedures. They were actually, my understanding of the document, and I'm not an attorney, but my understanding of the document is that they were actually charging companies to test for heavy metals that they were not licensed to test for, and that they rectified that and got themselves licensed. But there was a time when they actually said there was a misunderstanding between what the law said. Now, you can't be in the lab game, Amy, and have a misunderstanding about the law, can you?
So absolutely correct. Now, there have been points where it was hard to understand the exact communication coming from the MRA because the people that are writing the rules don't work in my lab or have to abide by the rules. So sometimes there is a miscommunication on terminology or something like that. To clarify for everybody who doesn't understand what the labs go through, so we have to go through validation and blind third-party proficiency testing on every analyte for the state at least once a year on the blind proficiency testing. And we have to provide all of that data to the state. So for every matrix, so for flour, for concentrates, for edibles, you have to do it for every single thing. So there was some confusion early on if I'm approved for potency, is that for everything? It was made pretty clear by the MRA. So I was the first lab that was licensed only under the MMFLA where I didn't get to work with caregivers ahead of time. So it was very much how the heck do I do this every day for a bit there? And the state was very helpful.
Kind of creating the airplane while you're in flight, right?
100%. And so, but it was very clear to us that each matrix had to be approved by the state, and the state gives you a document that says you are approved for these tests on these matrices. It's a document they provide.
So Jamie, that pretty much gets us caught up on history. Take over the story as far as the reality of what just recently happened.
Well, okay, so there was a bulletin that went out and by the MRA and letting everybody know that all products tested by Viridis, except for the concentrates, distillate, some vape pens. I mean, if somebody wants to be more specific, please let me know. Things that wouldn't have the microbial testing because it's right.
They've already gone through a heat purification process at some point. Yes.
Right. So there's those solvents and stuff like that. So and so that's why we think or they've kind of hinted toward or said it's kind of based around this, but we still don't know specifics. And something like 60% of the flour is being recalled. And somebody from Dykema Law estimated that being valued at about $200 million, if not more. And the investigation is ongoing. And I know we're joined here by Paul Tylenda, the attorney, too. And I know people are talking about lawsuits. The cultivators, the retail stores, other labs are looking at the state and or Viridis labs for possible things. Just wondering what's shaking out as far as you know, or what does that look like?
Well, I guess the short answer is this is exactly why you carry product liability insurance.
Yep.
And we're going to be seeing, we'll be testing the elasticity of some of these policies and see how the underwriters and the actual insurers like these types of cases. As I think that there's a practical concern based off of the initial let's just say the initial scare of the recall saying, hey, you can just go ahead and take this stuff back and return it. And with a little bit of direction saying, well, then you can take it back to the retailers, and retailers, you can just bounce it back to the producers. And you're essentially just going back up the chain, the product chain, without a ton of guidance, if you will, right? It's just, it's becoming a simple consumer information first, which is saying, go and take it back, right? Stop using it, take it back. Sort of like when I was growing up, it was lawn darts, right? Just stop using it, take it back. Dangerous, just knock it off. There's no excuse, just cut it out.
Right.
And it's created that limited guidance didn't do any good for any of the producers or the retailers, other than the retailer saying, okay, got to send it back. And the producers saying, well, okay, now what? Which, no one wants to, A, dig in their pockets first, B, sit around and wait for insurance to cut the check and do what it's supposed to do, because these are very, this industry is very minute by minute in terms of the impact and the influence of it all. But I don't know. Let's just say yes. Okay, there will be lawsuits, and there will be because that's what a lot of these, frankly, that's what a lot of these big companies and it's what a lot of these people are paying big law firms for, is to just sit here and be litigious, right? Find remedies and earn their keep. Which, as an attorney, I guess I can neither speak here nor there of that. But that's part of it. Now, let's just say at the end of it, what will these lawsuits amount to? And I think what you'll have is you may end up with some lawsuits being the insurance, people suing the insurance company looking for their own coverage, right? Saying, hey, I spent X, I want reimbursement. Other companies or companies suing other companies for the cost of the recall in the same way, which really the twist of it was, for me, and this is where, again, the lawyer the lawyer hat goes on. My understanding was that there was some kind of enough of a spark, right? Enough of a light
initial
to
complaint.
shine.
Yeah.
There you go, right? That somebody and said somebody was doing something. And when you're dealing with, let's just say, science and technology of this sophisticated level, this isn't something somebody went home and did and figured out at their house, right? This is something that other labs and somebody else with that level of knowledge and technology and the ability to determine and put it through the same test to create the same results, we're saying, hey, wait a minute, this isn't as labeled. Now, that's occurred throughout, right? The MRA has been known to pop up and say, hey, look, your label says 30% and it's actually 28, right? So you have to put a variance range in there saying plus or minus so often. So now you'll see these containers. I think I might have one here where I'll see like plus or minus 5%. So fair enough. Okay, great. But at least that's sticking true to the, let's just call it the truth in advertising as to what the consumer is getting. But again, to the lawsuit aspect of it, who's really going to be on the hook for the disruption, for the lost profits? And when the articles I'm reading was saying that after this initial complaint, is it Veritas? Am I saying this right? Veritas, they had
Veritas, but we know what you're talking about.
Veritas, it's okay.
Yeah.
There's an old rule about you stay away from the itis and the osis, right? And that's, I think, very true in naming your company here. But I believe they were given the chance to self-correct, right? Which is when you're talking, let's just say they do the same thing for Ford and GM, right? They'll give them the chance to say, you do it before we do. Because when you do a self-recall, it's bad for business. When the regulators do when the regulators issue a recall or demand a recall, it's bad for the industry. Because now everybody kind of, rather than Veritas going and taking it on the chin, if you will, right? Now they're going around leaving everybody who's ever played with them with a black eye. And while to say that that's not fair is an understatement, and to say that perhaps, I don't know if they're, yes, okay, pride and business decisions. are sometimes in conflict, right? Sometimes they're not, right? And this site seems like sort of a prideful moment to say, no, we didn't do anything wrong. No, we're not doing anything without providing that proof, right? If I were those guys from Varietas, the first things that I would do would be to contract 3 other independent labs and dump my stuff on them and say, here it is, here's the proof, here's my consistency. If that were true, if I could do that.
So
But if I can't, then I won't, and I'm going to shut up and say I didn't do anything wrong.
there is going to be some interesting stuff that comes out, I think, and Amy can now help us out with this. So that material that's being recalled can be retested because they don't know it to be bad; they just know it to be improperly tested.
Correct.
And so,
yeah.
2 tests will happen, and I know that your lab will get a lot, and some of the labs that are not Veritas will get a lot, and then they are saying that they're testing again, and they're offering up another test for free, and that counts as one of the valid second retests. So there'll be that at least comparison with another lab coming up.
So my understanding is they were offering to do both retests for free. And the last, and again, to me, nothing is true until I hear it from the MRA. But my understanding was they were offering to do all the retesting for free, and that basically they were trying to find a business solution to let's erase the problem that we caused. I don't know that is going to be effective. So 2 full retests do need to be run. There's
But they could do both of them possibly. That doesn't seem to make that much sense to me. Like you're not
seems
really
like a conflict of interest. Verify my own test
They-
results.
they
How is that
potentially-
science?
But that's what cops do, you guys. That's exactly what police officers
That's what the
do.
state. That's exactly what the state lab did. By the way,
And-
we brought this up with
Right.
Michael Camorn
completely.
uncovered the fact that
And-
the state
yeah.
police lab was monitoring themselves as their own like
and
third party.
I agree.
Second shift watching what first shift does.
Watching
That's not
themselves.
right.
Yeah, we're doing okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
we're
and-
okay.
And so the other thing that's a little unusual about this, and again, the MRA has promised to give the labs more guidance tomorrow. So, and again, till I hear it from the MRA, it's not completely true. But at this point, they're telling us that it's all microbial results, not just Aspergillus, which was what first came out. What caught my attention was when it first came out, it was Aspergillus. It tied to a deadline that the state gave labs. So basically, the state asks us to comply with AOAC subchapters for various types of testing. Cannabis not being allowed to be widely tested, there were very few AOAC or other accredited agency approvals. So we had to wait until they had them. But once they have them, you have to jump to that standard. So our lab director is on the cannabis work groups for both the AOAC and for the ASTM, which are the 2 major groups coming out with this. So August 10th was a deadline that we all had to upgrade to an AOAC monitored or AOAC approved Aspergillus test. So the date caught my attention. That doesn't necessarily mean it had anything to do with that. So, we were able to be compliant earlier on that, but anytime that they come out with new methods as a lab, you got to step up. That's eventually the theory is we'll be under the FDA. So.
Well, Amy, it's true that cannabis, when it's shipped after testing, is oftentimes broken down into 1/8 of a gram or even pre-rolls. Now, in a pre-roll, I think it's pretty impossible to reclaim that cannabis at this point. If it's in a pre-roll, you probably can't. Now, in an 1/8, though, you might assemble all the 1/8s together. You might open up all the packages to reassemble that batch and then be able to test that in volume. However, time-consuming, labor-intensive, delaying profit on product, plus requiring additional expenses for extra testing.
Probably dry it out more and lose some shake on it too.
Well,
you're not going to get the same weight. That's valid too.
You're not going to get and here's the reality. If I'm a lab and I'm testing that, if one facility, one retail establishment, one provisioning center stored it in the wrong type of thing, that might have introduced mold that the rest of it didn't have mold. So now I have to retest this whole thing as if it's representative. So we just need some guidance from the MRA because there's, and especially on the science side, I have to say that I have great respect for the people on the science side. Claire Patterson, who's running the science agency now, she's incredibly smart and she is very well read on science issues. So I feel confident with her making science decisions for the state as far as what we need to do. but you start introducing, did somebody touch something in that jar when they had just touched their phone and introduced E. coli, and should the other rest of this batch fail for that reason? No.
Right.
And it's but then should every single dispensary, for lack of a better term, have to retest themselves? No. It's they need to ponder this a second so we don't make the industry worse.
Amy, how much extra capacity does the testing industry have right now? Aren't you guys pretty much testing everything you got all day long, every day?
So we just reopened we're able to start doing adult use. So we're ramping up to capacity. So we've actually had capacity because I could only do medical for 17 months that I thought I would be able to do adult use. So we still have capacity. We have staff committed to work through the holiday and through the weekends to make sure everybody's taken care of. We've got people committed to doing pickups all week. We just want guidance from the MRA so that we, because here's the thing, for any of you that don't have to work with metric daily, one tiny mistake can lock stuff up for quite a while. And the last
Paul's laughing. I hear him.
Yep, exactly. The last thing in the world you want to do as a lab is make a mistake that locks something in metric. So I want to have firm guidance. How do I do this? What's the right way? How do I make sure I get because kind of another side note real quick on retests. So yes, there have to be 2. And immediately after completing them, you have to send your chain of custody and certificates of analysis to metric and the MRA in order to get them unlocked in metric. So this is a burden on the MRA and on metric that is astounding to even think about.
So it's not something they would have done flippantly. Clearly, they knew the consequence of what was going to happen, and they probably wouldn't have pulled the trigger on something of this magnitude if there wasn't sufficient supporting evidence. And Paul, to your point, I think everybody knows that anyone involved in the decision-making process at this point is likely to end up with their name on a piece of paper, right? At some point, a process server is going to be knocking on their door. So you want to make sure you have all the T's crossed and the I's dotted, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, and that's, again, speaking to how lawyers are, there's a lot of, let's say, shoot first and ask questions later, right? Let's get our court date and then figure out what the case is about. Again, maybe I just telling you how to pull rabbits out of hats here, but that's the truth. But that's, I mean, again, yes, there's going to be a lot of, quick draw McGraw type of reactions here. And to see how they play out in event, and for me, the important part is the short-term concerns for the business owners, right? What is the cash flow concerns for these people who are facing these immediate returns right now, for the growers who, let's say, don't deal in a whole lot of cash, but are facing bulk returns right now? And then who's going to be left holding the bag for what type of and to what degree of damages? And again, I can understand Verizon's position, because if they know they're going to be left holding the bag, I'm sure their lawyers have said, you've done nothing wrong, continue on, say nothing, because if it's the minute you say, hey, oops, we did this, now floodgates are open and everything goes through. So yeah, there's some self-preservation in this, but Amy, I've got a question for you. Hi, Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
In terms of for the process, is there a way, and my understanding is that with a batch sample, right, you take a certain percentage of the batch and you sample that out, right? And the sampling, let's say the test samples, for sake of argument, let's say you test 1 gram out of an eighth or a quarter that's the batch sample. Is there a way to, or is there any demand that you preserve the rest of that sample so that in this event, another lab or another verification can come in and say, look, for the 7 grams you were given, you tested 1, there's 6 remaining, we can test another to then verify exactly the same sample against what your results are, and essentially try to isolate or get an understanding of what was missed, how it was missed, and maybe even to find some truth, because that again would either support or deflate the arguments that Veritas has.
So there absolutely is. In the regs, it requires that post results, we keep a sample for at least 30 days. We typically keep it for 45, just in case. I can tell you as a lab owner that if potency comes in over 27%, we automatically expect to be audited, We have the raw data. We rerun. We have two different technicians prep and rerun it and send the raw data to the state for review. So we automatically know that's going to happen. And we do keep it on site. And you're supposed to have it for at least that 30-day time period. Now, clearly in this case, it would make sense they wouldn't still have their August, product available for retesting. So I suspect that given this issue, I wouldn't be surprised if the next safety compliance guide doesn't include a longer period of time. Now, we don't have to keep, so to use your example, and so basically it's a 0.5%. So if it's a 15-pound batch, we take roughly an ounce. So we have to homogenize at least half of that, and all analyses have to be run off that homogenized piece. We can keep the non-homogenized, we can keep the homogenized, we can there's no prescription for exactly how we keep it, but we do make sure we keep it.
Okay. So that should give at least it gives us a baseline, a standard to understand what they did wrong, perhaps.
Well, and so that's where, there's still some lack of clarity, because the fact that they're asking us to redo all microbials and the fact it's an ongoing investigation, I don't feel that I have any answers to speak to exactly what the issue is at this point in time. But I do know that this would not have been done if they weren't taking it very seriously.
And let's recognize that there are two separate issues here, Jamie. I'll go right to you in a second. There's the potency issue, which is just sort of, kind of rumor at this point. We've had a lot of people that said that, but there's not been any statement about potency from the MRA. Correct. And then there's the microbial testing, which is a mandated double retest of these particular products. Jamie, please.
Amy, is your lab being requested to do both of the tests?
Oh, for retesting?
Yeah, for
So
retesting.
It is pretty common. Now, what I will say is, so theoretically, if I tested for somebody and they failed for mold and they made the decision to remediate, they could call me, I would come back out and retest for mold after their remediation. So that is a very normal process that you use the same lab. In this situation where the lab's testing methods and or results are in question, I don't think that would make sense. But I also don't think that if you have a properly run lab doing the retest, there's really no conflict, because theoretically, they're all done where people don't know whether, whose testing you're doing. Somebody's reviewing it who doesn't know whose test you're reviewing. So sample A and sample B, whoever's reviewing results wouldn't know they're related. So it would make sense that they would come back the same if testing is being done properly. But I understand your question.
Yeah. So I do want to say that what I'm hearing that's going out is I'm talking to a lot of people, and I'm like, how could you even test with these guys is my thing from the beginning. I drive past these guys' lab every day, at least once or twice, and I start swearing. I get pissed. My wife knows all about it. She doesn't know any other lab in the state but Beardus. But the point is, as far as I had a good going on this one, but as far as I got myself worked up. I forgot. I had it all ready to go.
Sorry, man.
But no. So what the lab's telling everybody? They're calling. They're trying to keep customers. They're saying, hey, this is these the super far left liberal cop haters that are just coming after us and attacking us, and that's their stance and this and that. But how are you going to keep believing these guys? No, we don't. I don't hate cops. I think cops should. I love good cops. They should be, they shouldn't even have to pay taxes on their income. I love it. But dirty cops that have proven to be dirty cops, and then all these people that were caregivers and are on the no, the no changes list, and you're still going to use them. And if you're still going to use them after this, I don't get it. Check yourself in the mirror.
Yeah, I think there's a real concern here that you're seeing a company trying to deflect attention away from their own bad deeds and focus the conversation onto other people so that they don't look so guilty. Paul, you know what I'm talking about when I say these things. Essentially you're trying to paint the society as the enemy, and Veritas is just the victim. We're so picked on by government. Yeah, we did bad stuff. But government got us, right? So when we see these type of things, I can appreciate from my level exactly what kind of tomfoolery that they're putting. But I mean, to someone who's not clued in, Paul, that can be a pretty persuasive argument, right?
It is, because it's a sort of a surface level argument, right? It's an argument that doesn't engage in the facts of the matter. It doesn't engage in what really happened and what it was, and it essentially points the finger at the who and behind it. Now, the interesting part in the who behind it is, if these are the same people that have had, let's just say, accusations or investigations prior to getting into the lab that have to do with their ability to properly operate, or even perhaps their ability to tell the truth or operate the machines properly, and now they're going to have their skirt looked up by the state for exactly the same thing. The compliance conference for this item, in terms of the MRA, when they put you at the table and they say, okay, tell us your side of the story, what'd you do, and we're going to tell you what we found out, I'd be curious to see if that comes up. I'd be curious to see if they say, hey, this is a pattern. Based on this pattern, we might have questions as to your ability to do proper testing from here forward. Yeah. And that could be that. Those are probably the grand implications. I mean, there have been, I think, one big, someone got tagged for $100,000 in the past year from the MRA. And, there's been a few compliance conferences that have happened that, even for ministerial things, ultimately any item that would have to do with rule compliance or law compliance, the MRA will drag into, and they've been known in the past, let's just say in the past year, to start dinging people, right? They had a policy in their first year of educate, right? Nothing was really that bad of a violation unless it was really egregious, and everything was about getting you back on track and teaching the right way to do it. Somewhere in the last year, maybe when the baby turned a year old, they started slapping people, and I've seen a handful of what I would call pretty surprising results and assessments from the MRA for violations that are not malicious, right? Violations that are even outside of the hands of the professionals involved in running the company, right? This isn't one of those direct management issues like we have here with the lab testing. I've seen it to where outside contractors have caused complications, and you're telling the MRA that, hey, I hired this professional that is the only professional qualified to do this because I can't fill out these forms, yet I'm going to pay the penalty for that. And getting hit that hard, and then balancing that against, let's just say, a systemic issue, or let's just say a business problem, to where this looks more like no one in your office knows how to run a machine properly. But that might, and again, maybe here's another question for you, Amy. If they're failing microbials, is this a result of either a truly non-passing material, right? The material's in and of itself bad, or are they missing a step, not applying a chemical? Are they just omitting, somewhere one of the numbers in the 10-step process?
So it's still not clear exactly what this recall involves, but to take kind of a step backwards and overly simplify, in microbial testing for quite a while, there were two methods. There was traditional plating, and there was qPCR, which does DNA recognition. qPCR has been approved for DNA recognition on detect, non-detect for cannabis. qPCR had not been approved by one of these international standards companies or organizations for quantification for total yeast and mold or for coliforms. So because you couldn't quantify the total yeast and mold, the detection kind of didn't matter. So as an example, I could have a detect on something that had dead mold, or I could have a non-detect on something where there just did not happen to be the DNA it was looking for, because it doesn't speciate on different molds. So the state decided, once there was an AOAC approved method, which was plating, that the labs needed to switch. So we all, I can't speak for everybody. I switched. So I switched over, and I adopted that new method. It's a business frustration because qPCR takes 2 days less. And frankly, we did have more fails on the plating. So, it's a little bit of a question. And I've seen a couple kind of related questions going by in the chat about equipment and, that everybody should do something similarly. My suggestion, everybody's methods should be publicly available. You should, as a grow, be able to contact me and get my methods and have your chief science officer at your cultivation facility, if you have one, review my methods. It's this fact that cannabis is not federally integrated. So it's this deep, dark secret that we all have to keep because we all have to build it from the ground by ourselves. If the state mandated that we share our methods publicly, ABKO would be completely on board with that.
Wouldn't that provide, let's say, transparency in what's supposed to be a standardized process?
It'd be a lot of transparency. Yes, it would give everybody access. It would give my competitors access to exactly how I do it. And yeah, people might steal stuff that you're doing that's pretty cool, but that advances the industry.
I mean, it's not like this secret formula to McDonald's secret sauce or something, right? I mean, this is just lab stuff.
It's lab stuff, but there is a little bit of secret sauce to it in that, like, if I run a clinical lab and I'm testing people's blood or urine for drugs, there's a manual I go to that tells me exactly how to do that. That doesn't exist for cannabis. So we all kind of have to start writing that manual ourselves. And there's a tendency to be very protective of that manual. But the reality is the country is far along down the road. There are labs in, I think, 38 states now. Let's start acting like other labs and share our info publicly.
Amy, what do you think about this idea here? This is from Cass, who I work with. It's just saying to have the same standards across the board, which are specifically the international methods. And then, as you were saying, everybody should share. They were saying there's no reason you would have to do that then if you all had the same standards that had to be met.
Well, so I do agree with that to a point. So when you do your, like, for example, when you do your sample prep, when you do, there are things that a competitor could suss out from your information and perhaps use against you. I don't see any reason not to share methods. If they don't want to, then, and yeah, to that comment, as far as we've had international standards for 3 years, not on everything in cannabis, but that's why not share it? Why not be open?
So this is really about transparency, but it's also about making sure that there's no cheating in the industry. I mean, we talk about science to a certain degree, but corporatism enters into the scientific world too. And Ryan Basor tantalized us with a little bit of a statement earlier that I'd like him to expand on. He said he's missed a lot of deals because he refuses to deal with Veritas. I'm assuming, Ryan, that's because the people that you were potentially going to deal with liked the Veritas higher THC numbers. Would that be true?
Right. So here's like, do you think that Veritas tests 60% of the flower in the state because they're that great at business and all these growers want to go with these ex-cops? Is that even possible? So let's look at it that way at first. So there's
I can't laugh hard enough at that.
Yeah,
no,
that's right.
Something's up. Something's going on. But then, yeah, no. So like, I would never do it, and I wouldn't do it, and I won't do it. And so like if I have something that's 18%, and whatever, I've had stuff at 18%. That's 7% terps, 6% terps. It's incredible. But guess what? I'm at a huge disadvantage in the market. All of us are that aren't using Veritas because they'll come back at 22, 23, 24. And what they've done is perpetrate this myth that THC is the most important thing out there. So we have this public and these buyers now, like, I only buy things over 20%. It doesn't matter. So like, if you got it, they've done so much harm on the educational process of cannabis in general. They're setting it back, and a lot of these growers are just taking the easy way out, and they're going to use them, and I've heard some crazy rationalizations. So at this point, I don't know. Everyone start looking at who's doing the testing. If they're doing Veritas, like, that's a joke. When somebody comes back with me and say, "Oh, I just had this test, 31." I was like, "Oh, you used Veritas," and they're like, "Yeah, how'd you know?" Or, like I got a clone from someone, it's some genetics. Like, hey, the grower comes back at 28. Who'd you use? Oh, Veritas. Like, all right, so I'm hoping to hit 22 or 23. It's common knowledge. and we're at a disadvantage, but that's fine. Like, you know, like you do the right thing, you grind, you keep doing, you keep working, and then stuff like this happens. So like, I went from having a slower Croptober. We're doing well. We got great provisioning center partners. To like this week will be the best week of sales I've ever had in my company. And it would be a lot better, but there's some major issues with some of these provisioning centers where they're out of cash. Like, how do they get money now? Like, they've got 50%, 60% of all this inventory tied up, and they've got no money on it. Some of these growers aren't even calling back the retailers yet. They can't get them on the phone. So it's a huge mess. I really hope that people open their eyes, look at who's doing the testing. You know, this could happen again. Is it worth it to your supply chain? And why are you going to believe these guys? Like, the owner of the lab says this or that. He's a dirty cop. Like, he's proven. Like, why? Like, how many times are you going to be lied to?
Right. Well, and I tell you what, the aspect of this that I think is getting glossed over is there are 400 some odd dispensaries affected by this, retailers affected by this in terms of product.
30 pages of listings. Ugh.
A lot. And I tell you what, the thing for me is I didn't see a lot of people I know on there. And that makes me happy. So out of 400 on there, that means there's maybe a 200, give or take, that are not. I know whole companies that are not on that list. And that says something too. So these companies are competitive. They're staying afloat. They're dealing with other labs. They're getting other, competitive results that they don't need to, let's just say, buy, if that's the case. So, let's give a shout out to those guys. Let's give and again, it's not that some who have been guided into, like Ryan's talking about, some that have been encouraged or directed into Veritas just because they don't know better, or it's, let's just say, a condition of doing business. Let's not necessarily hold those people as guilty as the other ones, but the ones that are going out there to shop directly for, let's just say, known results or encouraged results, much like you want to get your house appraised. Well, how much do you think it's worth?
Hey, I used to do that, man. It's
but
a little too close to home,
Jamie.
Power of suggestion, right? Power of suggestion and a handful of cash works every time.
But now we're kind of like talking in terms of a foregone conclusion. It should be mentioned again that Veritas could explain their methodology, why they're getting consistently higher, THC percentages, or maybe they're not. Maybe they'll demonstrate that they're just whatever it is. That hasn't been concluded yet. That hasn't been a part of the conversation from the MRA.
This is all hypotheticals, right? Yep.
But
let me just point out
strong opinion.
A potential pattern, though. If you notice in our story about the Michigan State Police Crime Lab, people went to the crime lab and said, we need better results. And, the crime lab sort of changed the way they did things in order to generate better results for prosecutors. Now we have a situation where you have a cannabis testing lab, and possibly the partners come in and say, the customers come in and say, we need better testing results. And magically, all of a sudden, procedures and policies come in place which allow them to produce better test results. I'm not saying that there's a one-to-one correlation. I'm just saying, light bulb, right? It looks to me like a proven pattern of behavior by these particular individuals too. And again, as Jamie said, everything is just supposed at the same. Paul, what's the correct phrase we're supposed to use? It's
allegedly.
It's all alleged at this particular point. Thank you. It's so nice having you around. But at this point, we really want to emphasize that nobody's guilty until they're proven that way. And even sometime when they're proven that way, they're not guilty. But in this instance, we're talking about real consequences of this mistake, regardless of a later court decision by a judge. Right now, we're looking at literally hundreds of facilities that are having to go through each and every one of the items on their shelves, and there are many items on their shelves, to check and see who the manufacturer is, whether or not it was produced during the time period in question, whether it's a concentrate or whether it's one of those items that are being recalled, and then decide what the hell to do with them. Because Amy, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, the directions were sort of send them back, but also the retailers could have the product retested themselves. How is that even going to work?
That's
I mean, a
yeah.
retailer doing that?
Yeah, the state let out 3 options. So one was return it to the facility you got it from. Number 1 was destroy it. Number 2 was return it to the facility you got it from and have them have it retested. Number 3 was that labs can come out and retest. As a lab with capacity to help these businesses, I'm hesitant until I get firm direction from the MRA, because doing things wrong can cause more harm than good. So the question to me would be, okay, so somebody had a 50-pound batch, they sold it to 5 different provisioning centers. Do I have to go select from each of those 5? Do I add the number up for those 5 to come up with my 0.5%? Who pays for it? How do we do this? Is any transport necessary? Going to 1 is not a statistically significant sample. So it's complicated, to make a long story short. So we're looking forward to more guidance from the MRI and to help with, exactly how do the logistics and mechanics of this retesting work.
I just saw a post by Charlie, and or a comment by Charlie. I want to address that too, because this is another thing down the road that's going to come up. So you got, a lot of these. You got Green Peak, you got Common Citizen, you got Live Well, you got all these MCMA companies. Well, allegedly, what they do, even though there's a lot of good facts out there on that, they have their own labs, because their SOPs, they remediate everything before they send it to the Veritas. So now they have their bragging, like Green Peak coming out, don't worry, we have our own lab. Yeah, they remediate it first. They're people that they've fired, and then they come and tell me it's standard pricing. They can't pass the PM and the microbial. So that's why people are like, well, I got this 28% pre-roll from Live Well, and it didn't get me high. Well, yeah, it's been microwaved. So like as Charlie just said, Green Peak came out and has their own lab. That's great, but they also remediate. Their SOPs are to remediate everything before they even send it to the lab. So that's a good topic for another conversation, though. Maybe they should put on their bags, this weed's been microwaved.
Conflict of interest. How can you test your own cannabis, right? We've just been joking about people that tried to make that claim, and now here we have people bragging about it. Yeah, everything's cool. Don't worry about it. I tested it. I had my grandma. She came over to the lab and ran a couple samples for us.
I think Cass is pointing out that Green Peak has a lab, and they do it for their own results. That's not the official results. Right. Then they send it to the third party lab that's not connected.
Right.
And I recognize
remediate everything first.
That kind of takes away their bragging point, right? I mean, if they're saying they have their own lab, but we still have to have it tested by someone else, then why bring up that you got your own lab then?
So they know how much they have to devote to processing?
Because you trust them.
Yeah. So remediation, in my opinion, is a real issue. I can appreciate why remediation might be necessary, but I also believe that every product that has had cannabis that's been remediated should carry a little logo on it, like you see the non-GMO or whatever, so that you as a consumer can tell whether or not it's been exposed to some kind of special gas or been zapped with X-rays or microwaves, or Doc Bruce Banner belted by gamma rays. I don't know. I mean, at this point, let's face it, the remediation techniques are not regulated to the best of my knowledge. So they could be doing any kind of whack job, chloroquine when whatever.
They have I think it's specific to different things that you can do to it.
There's a reason Willow's sales and services are crazy in the tens of millions of dollars. They're growing like crazy. Somebody's using them. I know, like the guys that I work with and the ex-caregivers that are now growers, they never use the Willow because like if there's any issues with it, if they have a bad crop, it goes to concentrates.
Tell our watchers what the Willow is, Ryan, please.
Well, I mean, the Willow is basically the remediation, the microwave machine where you can put the cannabis in it, and Amy can do a better job explaining it than me. But you put the cannabis in it, and if there's powdery mildew, if there's mold, it kills it and it gets rid of it. So, and that's common. That's in these guys' SOPs now. These guys and gals. So, like, what the consumer and these are the people that are pushing the MCMA bills. So, if we're worrying about testing, maybe we should put on that if you're going to remediate it, that would be something I know as a smoker, and every smoker I know would like to know if their cannabis has been microwaved before they smoke it. That's something we need to put in this bill if you're really concerned about safety.
That seems to be supported.
Yeah, so I'm not a cultivator, so I don't know the exact process, but my understanding is that once that the cultivators have to get permission from the from the MRA to remediate, and then we do our real stuff, our retesting, and then they are supposed to put it on the label. Is my
Well, they're talking about testing before it ever goes to the lab the first
Before.
time.
Remediate it before I touch it. I can't do anything.
Exactly.
Right. I'm hearing there's tests though that you can now you can find out if something has been remediated that are getting there. So maybe that's something there'd be put them in check.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think most of us here on this call would love kind of a mid-range THC, but really terpy. You know, something that has a lot of flavor to it, something that leaves you saying, wow, that was a good joint, even if it doesn't get you so stony that you can't even watch a burner movie. You know, so chasing THC is just a marketing ploy. We all know that, but it's also an effective marketing ploy. Right now, the consumer, the average guy on the street, doesn't have any way to metric his cannabis other than THC content and the name, which in many cases I think are made up anyway. So
that's all we got. That's all we got. Unfortunately, I think that's one of the consequences of the equation of alcohol, where it's name and proof.
Right.
And it's going to take, and again, the fact that we're acknowledging the existence of percentage of THC in anything else, and that it's not just, hey man, do you have pot? It speaks to some of the maturity that we're accomplishing in our industry here, and it'll get there, right? It's happening on the West Coast, right? Those profiles are starting to become more common in terms of what you're seeing, and once people start to figure out that, hey, it's not just this 22%, but it's this like 0.03%. That's what I'm really looking for over here. You'll start to get that, but that comes with a sophisticated industry, education on behalf of the industry, from the industry, on behalf of the producers. And again, I look at wine, like, how do you know about sulfates or any of that kind of crap until some wine nerd shows up, right? Think about the microbrew industry, and think about all the IBUs and specific gravities of this and the alcohol and all of that stuff. No one knew about that in the Budweiser days, and it took only a little bit to educate the crowd to say, okay, what you're looking for and what you want is defined in these sets of numbers. So go for it this way. You like it more hoppy, you like it less hoppy, go for it that way. Once cannabis gets to that point, which is probably going to be in the next 2 years, you'll start to see more of the demand of like I need 17%, but I need a total of like 5% of everything else.
I'd love to see dual labeling where we see THC broken out content. I will tell you that I really like some of the pre-roll containers that we get that have THC content listed right on there, as well as the terpenes. When it tells me that it's got limonene or myrcene in it, I can then use that information to gauge. I'm excited about that. But I also noticed that we're downsizing packaging too. I actually got a set of concentrates in my Sensi magazine influencer bag where the MRA label, here it is right here, was wrapped around the concentrate bowl in a circle, so that in order for me to use it, I had to remove the MRA tag. And I know that wasn't the intent, but because we're racing to get smaller and smaller in our packaging, sometimes and the writing on these labels is just pathetically tiny. You can't even read it.
And part of that, Rick, is cost too. Like, it's become such cost driven market. Like if you're selling a gram of sauce, and you can save $2 on the packaging, it's a big deal, because it is like, so there's a lot of people going that way because it's becoming so cost driven. But it sucks. There's a lot of retailers out there that understand terpenes and the whole deal, but they still have I won't buy any flower under 20% policy. And that's that's it. And the Veritas is partly to blame for all that too. So let's get this fixed, and we'll speed up that process. Let's get that 2 years, like Paul said.
I love the concept of changing the way that society buys cannabis, but I think that's a much slower change than what we'd like it to be. I do think, though, that as far as agents of change, that retail locations and podcasts like Jazz Cabbage Cafe, like Smoke and Rope, those particular things, we can help move forward the needle. We've done that, even if it's just a Michigan local thing. I think when people come to Michigan, we're a far more educated consumer base than they find in other states. We are more interested in the higher quality cannabis, also in the more exotic concentrates. Every time something new comes out, we're all jumping all over it. And I think that, sometimes that's great, but sometimes it also means we move a little faster than maybe we should. Sometimes we go a little before safety and market forces are ready to support it. So I don't know. Jamie, this has been a great broadcast, though.
Thank you very much.
I'm glad you all came here. We don't have to end it right at this moment, but I think we've talked about quite a bit of the components that we know anyway going on and what's happening so far, and it seems to be a pretty big deal.
I actually have a question and Paul, I know you were going to speak up. I apologize. Who owns that cannabis that's in a retail store? Sometimes it's on the shelf because the retailer bought it in advance, and that means the retailer's out the money. Sometimes it's on the shelf on consignment, which means the retailer just ships it back, and whoever actually produced it, I think, is technically on the hook for it. There's really no hard, fast rule about this. Is there anybody?
Short answer is the contract. What's the deal? You might get better rates if you buy it up front. Some of these guys want it all on front because the growers, it's perhaps just part of the relationship like anything else. But that really is where the cash issue comes, because if these guys are either cash out of pocket or not going to get paid that month because the inventory came back, it's a big immediate problem. And this is one of those issues where it's, when you have an event and the insurance company is involved, it's like a car crash, right? You have the car crash, and then you have the trauma of the immediately preceding days and how you process it and how you deal with it. And then by the time that it's actually remedied, everybody's already figured it out and solved it and moved on. And the technology and the industry's already caught up before the insurance companies really start cutting checks.
So let me just bring up a point here, though, for example, if I'm a retail store ABC and I purchase a bunch of cannabis and then that gets product recalled, I'm supposed to send it back to the producer, but the producer doesn't own it. I still own it. Now it's supposed to transfer out of my possession to someone else, even though it's mine? How is that supposed to work?
Right. Now, is it I'm bouncing it back to you for testing? Now, with that in mind, Rick, how about that? If I bought the product or if you bought the product from me and I have no obligation to you now to do anything of it because the transaction is complete. This is where the retailer would then have it retested. And so maybe the retailer would say, okay, here are my, 50 or however many prepackaged eighths, take your however many, whatever the percentage of that would be, and then sample those out. You take that as a loss and then hopefully save the rest of the product, because now I think we're in we're getting to the salvage portion of this operation, to where now it's like, okay, well, shit hit the fan and I crashed my car, but how much value can I get out of what happened, right? How much can I preserve? And there's going to be a lot of that, which then is going to affect people's actual damages and going to determine how much people actually lose. And that might be the time that we need to wait until things are actually determined. Again, doesn't mean someone's not going to sue, but moving forward, you might see it. I don't think we're the first state to see some kind of lab scandal, if you will. I'm familiar with an event that was occurring in Illinois where apparently it had to do with, before they could have flour, I believe it was the extracts and the vape pens, and it had to do where all of a sudden no one would buy anything under 90% So all the vape pens were 90, 91, 92, and then, oh no, these are 93 and then 94. And it got up to something completely ridiculous until I'm not quite sure how that resolved, but that was part of the game there for a while, I understand. But it's, it's foreseeable, right? When anybody judges the purity or is responsible for the purity or responsible for the regulatory tag on it, they're going to get it wrong. Now, who's responsible for getting it wrong? The people that actually got it wrong or the ones that found it? And if they got it wrong, well, let's say the MRA is wrong.
Yeah, but how can you be wrong when you find something? When you find wrongdoing, I mean, you and I we know, you've been my attorney before, a bad process by an investigator can lead to an incorrect conclusion that certainly looks plausible enough, but really is based on lies. So I understand all that. But I mean, this seems...
If there's no standard, right? If essentially there's a little bit of wiggle room and the lab's able to say, oh, we did everything according to it. And we, again, speaking of secret sauce, we did our secret sauce and we didn't think we did anything wrong. I mean, someone's going to pull that. That's the basis of the defense's position.
Yeah, you got
it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I didn't do anything wrong. Oh.
Well, right. You're going to defend it through the process and say, yeah, and maybe here's something that we're all familiar with is they're going to take advantage of the gray area, right? If there's no requirement, because there is no transparency to show how everything from A to Z is accomplished, they might be able to hide behind some of their trade secrets or business procedures to say, well, we did A through Z, but we added our secret sauce and did this, and this is how it came out, and we didn't do anything wrong.
Rare. These guys put a lot of people in jail, charged a lot of people, and took away kids based on the gray area, and them not understanding the law is no excuse. So,
while I'm thinking about it, you are referring to like many kids, but there's in that article the Max Lorenz story was there, which is particularly sad, and unfortunately, that their parent and child are reunited now, but that wasn't a foregone conclusion even after it was determined that he really didn't do anything wrong. But there was also a story of a corrections officer in a jail on the west side of the state who was just using butter, legitimately finding it very useful for conditions, had a card, all that kind of stuff. And this had to do with the Carruthers singer, similar to what we're talking about here. It was a concentrate. It wasn't leaf or bud. And he was going to get charged with felonies, and he ended up committing suicide.
Yeah, that case ended up being resolved in their favor on the search warrant issue, I believe.
Absolutely, because they went at 4:00 in the morning and knocked on the damn door, woke up the wife and kids in order to perform an administrative search, an administrative warrant. So that absolutely just shows, I mean, I'm sorry that happened to them, but Paul, this is what happens to us, cannabis people, all the time. You spent 10 years plus defending people that had their dogs shot, the guns held to their children's head. I mean, some of the cases we've seen have just been beyond description.
That officer openly spoke about it. Like it wasn't a secret. They talked about how he, was a patient and used the medicine. It worked. They didn't have to show up 4:00 in the morning and do any weird shit like that. They probably could have just.
They're corrections officers. They're just regular guys, right? Those guys are just, taking the worst of it.
Yeah.
But there was, I mean, hell, we all know that there's a decade worth of those kind of tragic encounters that we're, trying to move out of, right? Now that we're doing it at the licensed level, the regulated level, and this behavior still kind of, it still exists. And I go back to even the Don Bailey days to say, what would this type of analysis look like if you had to go in front of the board and say, hey, this is
moral character.
Absolutely. Well, they wouldn't have gotten licensed under Bailey because of the moral character issue, because of the investigation. And maybe I'm wrong, but this would have been one of those very problematic type of cases for them. And I think we can all agree that we just want everybody to just kind of just do it right. I mean, I don't want to say follow the rules but we want to do it right. And we want it to be an even playing field. We want everything to be fair, especially, that was the idea of the regulated playground, is that it's essentially, it's blind, it's fair, it's universal, and it's fair to all. And if there are cracks, and let's just hope that this issue is more about not doing your job properly, rather than any other, let's say, dirty side, dirty hand, dirty corruption, because that would be the larger issue that the industry would take longer to recover from, rather than just something that we could chalk up at the end of the day as being these ding dogs did it wrong, right? You're looking to do A, B, and C, and you didn't do B, so okay, you get tagged for it.
Bad procedure
life
instead
goes
of
on.
bad intention, right? Exactly.
Absolutely. And that's actually, it's better for everybody, especially for them, right? Because if it's one of those like, oh, hey, oops, sorry, we're new to this. No one's been tested cannabis. There's no federal procedure for this. There's no how-to sheet on it. So our bad, we'll eat this. This is why we have insurance, and let's move on from it. I think that would be better for everybody, because then at least it takes the finger pointing away. And that's the biggest problem right now is the retailers looking to the growers, and the growers looking to somebody, and everybody looking for help, and everybody looking for answers. And of course, when that happens, everybody's getting angry.
Let's talk about one big issue that's been exposed by this particular scandal that doesn't have anything to do with labs. And let's talk about the danger of allowing single corporations to dominate an industry to the point where a flaw on their part significantly disrupts the entire goddamn chain, right? Now, if you're talking about one particular lab, or which is actually two branches, but one lab that has a commanding amount of the testing volume in the state, then that's a vulnerability. When we allow gigantic cannabis operators and cultivators to have overproduction licenses, and we give them the ability to go beyond what they would normally be allowed, and they have these gigantic mega grows. If something were to happen to them, say a corporate bankruptcy, and all of a sudden all that cannabis was just turned off of the system, that would really hurt. Brian, are you trying to get in?
No, I had a quick thought on that.
Please.
I think that takes care of itself on the lab issues. If everyone's using a standard test and all the labs are working on with the same hand that they're dealt, Veritas doesn't test 60%. Maybe they test 5-10%. So I think that's a big deal. But like as far as these mega grows, as we're seeing out west of Canada, there's only so much of an appetite for remediated boof and crap. So like those guys are growing, and they're going to be trying to overgrow it. That's why you got a lot of these Flourishes and Live Well and all these companies now, and Common Citizen going down to $700 a pound. And then but like it doesn't affect really like we see out west. We see really good more of the craft cannabis still getting the $2,000 a pound in the regulated market, and some of the best caregivers that have been in the state have made it over to the regulated market and are doing 100, 500, 1,500 plant grows, and those guys won't be affected by the overgrowth. So if they cut off Live Well or something like that, the biggest producer, well, then they're just I don't think it's too big a deal in Michigan.
I pay attention to a lot of the trade journals, cannabis industry stuff, and many multi-state operators have said publicly that they're hesitant to come to Michigan because it's an open market. Whatever the municipalities will allow, the MRA will approve, which is a great way to do it. But in other states, they have limitations on the number of licenses that they'll issue on a statewide level. So there's a methodology for price control when there's just a limited number of licensees. And when it's an open, unregulated licensing scheme as we have here, I think the consumer really is the one that dictates price and control. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, without a doubt, and that's one thing. Some of these MCMA companies, it's no secret they're for sale, and they've been for sale. And you see these huge M&As going on, publicly traded, and they've put down their foot that we're not going to buy you until you do something about the caregivers and you do limit these licenses. So that's part of that big push. But in Michigan, besides Oklahoma, and California, but they're a mess with their taxes. Like, we do have 100 plant grows, 500 plant grows. If there's a will, there is kind of a way. And, they're, especially when you add in all the caregivers that are open source of information. And, we're competing, these states like Ohio, Illinois, Florida, they're short-sighted. They're limited, and they Green Peak could go down to Florida and be super successful, or Illinois and grow. But eventually the walls come down, and this is a world market. And if we allow competition, allow the best growers, and have this fierce competition in Michigan, if you're waking up not trying to get better, you're falling behind. So, as much as some people like to rag on Prop 1 has been incredible as far as the regulated side of it, to allow a lot of people to get involved that maybe they would never ever have a chance in almost every other state.
And of course, Jamie Lowell
that was the
on
point.
Our broadcast today, one of maybe 8 or 9 people that can actually claim to be a true author of the Prop 1 language. So thanks again to Jamie for listening to what I told him to do. That's great.
To your point, Ryan, actually, to your point,
couple of you. Okay.
To your point, Rick, too, is that the point of the Michigan laws was to have that low barrier of entry. And the big boys from all the other states are so used to having high barriers of entry, or certain conditions or certain hurdles that they have to clear in terms of raffle or numbers and various limitations, that they like that because they're geared for that. They're built for that. Michigan is a mom and pop state. We are, again, a microbrew kind of state, that the big companies don't want a lot of competition, and they don't want a difficult competition. They don't want a connoisseur competition in terms of that marketplace. And then the other fear that I have in terms of the lab usage, that goes back to your point too, Rick, is that the growing footprint now is probably, let's just say, about 25% complete, maybe 50% complete, depending on who's building right now. There are a lot of growers that aren't using 100% of their floor space either. So when that starts to increase, are we going to start to see more flower going to the same labs, or more flower from different sources going to different labs? All of our hope is the latter, of course. But that's going to be the issue of, are we going to get these players out of the game? I mean, will this type of activity survive? I think it will. They'll get slapped and move on. But the reality of it is that how to, what Ryan is saying, how do you get people to kind of spread it around? How do you get the guarantees to where, if, with the limited number of labs that there are in the state, if one goes down, how do you not take the rest of the industry, or how do you not take 60% of the industry with you?
Yeah. I'm not sure if there's a way to actually do that's compliant with Michigan Constitution and with the democratic principles. I'd like a free market economy. Ryan Basor makes a good point that all things will eventually even out, but I still think that when we allow single individual companies, through whatever purpose, since they have greater resources or whatever, to be so dominant in the market, we create this vulnerability. And really, as a consumer advocate, I want stability in the marketplace. I want to know that I have 3 places right around here. If Jars goes down, and if Lighten Up Skymint goes down, I've always got, Lighten Up Provisioning Center right there. That's my first choice anyway. But when you see one place or one thing that happens that might make it terrible to shop at all 3 of those locations, of course, I've never even entered the parking lot at Skymint. Ugh, you break. And Jars is open just recently. I haven't been in there yet either. But
I appreciate you guys having me on. I'm gonna go run. I got some baby duties.
Ryan Basor, Cannabis, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Ryan. Congratulations again.
Thank you.
Ryan, the recent father of Newton Ellis Basor.
And I think
Ryan and Jenna, wonderful
Smoke and
parents.
Rope is going to do a special Tuesday edition too, and talk about some of this stuff a little bit more, also, if I'm not mistaken.
Hopefully, hopefully
It seems big, man. We'll get some more answers later, right? I mean, but
Amy, you are expecting more communication from the MRA tomorrow, and you mentioned that it's more guidance geared toward the labs. Do you think we're going to get any more insight as to what actually was the root cause of this problem?
I have no sense for that. What I have found, my communications with the MRA are very much just facts. There isn't a lot of here's why we're asking you to do this. It's here's what we are asking you to do, and there doesn't tend to be a lot of the whys behind it. So I do expect more guidance. I don't expect any more insight into exactly what the issue is unless it changes the guidance on how we do our sample selection. If for any reason that were the case, then we might.
So batch size has increased now. We're up into 50 pounds. It wasn't always that way, though. It was a much smaller size when we began this whole thing, right, Amy?
Started at 15. And
Right.
like if you were to look at like corn or grain or other types of products, usually 5 to 10 is what's considered statistically significant, where you can get a good sample. So we're up to 50, which means that on a 50-pound batch, I have to take around 114 to 118 grams, depending on exactly how it's weighed out, and then we have to homogenize at least half of that when we get back to the lab. So it is a significant amount, and we need guidance that if it's at 5 different provisioning centers or retail locations, do I have to go to all 5 and get a 0.5% of what each has remaining? Do we add it all up? How do we? Yeah, there's a lot of questions.
So really, when we go from a 15-pound batch to a 50-pound batch, what we're saying is that we're now testing 1/3 of the rate that we would normally have for the same exact harvest. True?
That is correct. That is absolutely correct. It is. So the testing batches are defined by similar strains raised in similar circumstances. So you have your craft growers that don't care about the quantity that's produced by each plant. They care more about the quality. They're more interested in the entourage effect, the terpene profile, the whole cannabinoid profile. Those places are testing as much as they did before because they typically don't grow more than 15 pounds of any one strain. It's the big facilities that are doing 50-pound batches.
Right. So my point being that although testing is expensive, the marijuana regulatory agencies made it easier for businesses to survive, not in the testing industry, but other businesses to survive by alleviating some of that thing, by dropping the requirement down essentially, 1/3 of what it originally was.
And to your point on that, when it started at 15%, the testing cost was roughly 1% of the gross revenue you get from that, or under, depending on the pricing. So now it's a fraction of a percent. It's less than 1/3 of a percent.
So it makes the make cultivation a lot more fiscally possible because the testing factor is a lot smaller.
Correct. And one of the other things is under the MRTMA, where you're allowed to actually have more total yeast and mold in the adult use product than in the medical. So a large chunk of product that failed for medical on the total yeast and mold passed for recreational.
Is it really that kind of a variance? I mean, I assume that if you miss, oftentimes you just barely miss. So if there was some kind of an allowance, those barely misses would be passes. But is it really that significant?
So you can have 10,000 colony forming units on medical product and 100,000 colony forming units adult use. So it's a very significant
tenfold.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Wow. That offers a lot of it. And when you look at national standards, our adult use standard is pretty much in line with other states. Would you agree?
I would say we're a little more stringent than a lot of other states, but we're in line. We're not behind anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say we're in line.
Okay. Great.
Amy, can I ask you, do you anticipate out of this whole situation something that will create a rule change for the labs, or do you think this will be more of a administrative slapping, if you will?
So what I've seen, so being again kind of the first lab licensed solely under MMFLA, so I didn't exist prior to that license. I think my experience has been a little bit different. I will definitely say that the state has a much greater depth of bench now on the science side. They're, trying to write a manual for a business that doesn't have a manual, and they're, trying to figure it out as they go. I think they've done a fantastic job. There are now, multiple people in the scientific division, and I have a lot of respect for what they're doing. So what I see happening is they're starting to, like, when we get our safety compliance guides every 6 months, I have a feeling the next one is going to have a lot more specific guidance on sample selection, sample retention, things like that. And I do foresee I don't want to use the word invasive, but can't think of what other word to use, but types of inspections. Where when they have more staff, they can actually sit and watch you work for a day, like an ISO inspector would do.
Is there surprise inspections now? Is there something that would?
There are. So, and just anecdotally, I had one situation where an MRA inspector showed up at my door, wanted me to retest for total yeast and mold. And it turned out it was a business thing where a provisioning center way back in the day had just Googled moldy weed and tried to tell the MRA it was bad. But they came in, they could see the sample, we tested it again and provided the results. But they just showed up at the door for that one. That was, within my first 90 days of being open.
Sort of got to expect in the first 90 days that they're probably going to swing by and check you out.
You know what? And it's never a problem. When over COVID, obviously we had a lot of virtual inspections. And the last inspection that ABKO had, they called the night before and said, "Hey, we're allowed to come tomorrow. We'll see you at 10." And that's absolutely fine. We're here for the safety of the consumer. I should have no reason to not want to let the MRA in my door anytime they show up.
Right. I mean, Paul will tell you when you tell the cops no, they like to take that as a sign of guilt of something.
Yeah.
Well, with the MRA now, it's if you just say no, I'm not available, it was like, how about tomorrow? And the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and the next. I was out of town and I had my inspection, and man, I had some phone calls. Holy cow. But it's kind of what you want in a sense, because for their schedule, it's like, look, if you're on schedule for the inspection, then just here it is, because we're in your neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
But to their credit, the encounters that I've had, and I guess to be fair, I guess I only had my encounters on this side of the state going north, but all the inspectors that I've dealt with have been fairly reasonable people. Like, it's not a cop encounter at all, which is it's a nice change of pace, even for government inspections. I mean, even, some of these, some of them can just be a little too unnecessarily strict about things, and they're fairly pleasant. They're very helpful. They'll tell you in ways that you can make, get things accomplished. They're not there to thwart your goals. They're not there to, in my experience, I didn't have a color printer, so I ran out and bought one, and they stood around and waited for me. So, the inspectors there, the people that you're actually dealing with that make your dreams come true, have always been very, very good. And they've kind of come over from that regulatory stance of like, hey, we're here to check your stamps essentially, and make sure you're checking all the boxes. And when they do your inspection, they're just looking at the sheet of what the boss tells them to look at. So there isn't a whole lot of, officer discretion, if you will. So the encounters are, they're not as stressful as I guess we were once used to.
Amy,
I guess maybe it depends on how you're doing. It depends on what you're doing.
I totally agree. And I have not found anybody that I've dealt with at the state to be unreasonable in any way. And, it's public information. I had a complaint that I had to deal with the state. All of that information is publicly available, as it should be. I don't have any complaints at all with the people I've dealt with at the state. The only thing would be, they can be short-staffed, but that has nothing to do with the individuals involved. The inspectors have been helpful more than hurtful. They're there to help you get open, not to try to keep you from opening. At least that's in my experience.
Yeah.
Labs may be treated a little differently.
No, I keep an eye on the page that the Marijuana Regulatory Agency maintains of their disciplinary actions.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you what, they've been finding a lot of people for not filing their paperwork on time. You know what I'm saying, Paul? Your eyes went wide when I mentioned that. Oh,
It's remarkable too, because and this is what I was getting to at the beginning about in terms of where the MRA is and how they will slap you for certain things. I'm surprised in terms of what we're referring to as the annual financial statement, which is your annual CPA attestation of what you guys have done. And the problem with that is because it requires a CPA to do it, you have to have a CPA do it. So this isn't something that you can generate from your office, that you have an internal employee that can handle it, that's in charge of this. You have to have, I mean, unless you have a CPA on staff, but you have to go out and hire a third-party professional to accomplish this.
That's exactly what I was going to say, because it's not even my CPA. I have to go find somebody else to do this. So my CPA would cut me the slack and get it done, but now I got to go find somebody else.
Exactly right. And I've seen situations, and I've seen, unfortunately, more than a handful of it, where the CPA is like, oh, my company won't let me do these marijuana encounters, even though you've done all the other filings for the company and the like. Yep. But because all of a sudden you've got to submit something that says MRA on it, you get gun shy. And they're very, this isn't one of those like, hey, get it to us in 5 days or we'll ask you for it again. This is like, here's the deadline. And if not, prepare to lose a finger over it. And the penalties, especially for things that are out of the licensee's control, right? And a lot of it has to do with the availability and or willingness of the CPA, even where it's like, hey, our CPA told us 30 days ago that we can't, he wouldn't be able to do it. Our new CPA said it's going to take 60 days to do it. It's due in 45 days, right? So you're going to take the punch, you're going to take the hit, because these are now getting into the let's just say the strict regulatory issues of it, to where it's, do you comply, yes or no, right? Were you on time, yes or no? It's not about the gray area. It's not about getting some love or, hey, come on, I got some problems. It's going to be, do you have this done, yes or no? And you're going to start seeing people, having their list of things to do annually start to increase, because they're going to be a lot of, do this or get fined a whole lot of money, and it ain't worth it. And that, again, is starting to be the shape of where the MRA is taking it. It's to be like, hey, you can afford to pay these big penalties because you're a marijuana company, and the state's thinking the same thing a lot of people who deal with marijuana companies do, is that just because you have a company, you must be loaded. But it's an interesting approach. And I'm not quite sure why that particular paperwork is something worth issuing such a stringent penalty over, unless that's where it begins, right? They start to say, okay, well, hey, remember how nasty you were with the AFS?
Set the standard, right? Yeah,
right. Like it's the rising water, right? It's like, everything's going to start to look like that. It's the invading troop, right? It's coming through, and if they're preparing us for it. And if that's the case, guys like me love it, because compliance side, where you got to make phone calls like 6 months in advance and be just like, hey, heads up, don't forget this. And then 90 days in advance and be just like, you got to have this done pretty soon. And you'll start to get more of that, because the practitioners, the licensees, based on where they're coming from, especially for the mom and pops, they're technicians. They're not managers, right? They're not compliance people. They're not attorneys. They're not CPAs. What do they know about? They know about how the grow room works. They know about how essentially ultimately to buy and sell marijuana. And now they're going to get lost in the weeds of it all with the regulatory compliance. And it's going to start to look, now it's worse than liquor laws, because with liquor license, they might come in and say, close for 4 days or pay us $400, and the choice is easy, and life goes on. Whereas some of these penalties are
he's fading on us. So he'll come back around, I'm sure. The connection will get better. But we've
Amy-
done an hour and a half. Go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, Amy, you dealt with the same type of issues. Jimmy, you were probably going to say it's about time for us to wrap it up.
I was going to say we've gone an hour and a half. Give people an opportunity to add anything that might not be added. And
That's a great freeze frame of Paul, by the way. He's just
looks very serious.
I know.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
and I think in some ways the communication is a little bit different because cities communicate different than the state. And sometimes you get an email and sometimes you get something in the mail. So I think the state will start getting it nailed down because sometimes as a licensee you don't feel notified. It's like, well, I didn't know. It's like, well, it's on page 700 of this. Like, okay.
Yeah. Yep. I remember when they used to say at the marijuana regulatory meetings, they would say, oh, if you want to know some new information, keep an eye on the website because we'll update the website. Well, of course, it was terrible. And I said in a meeting one time, look, press releases or just regular notifications. I get notifications from all of the craziest, silly things from government. And all of a sudden, bam, we started to get notifications. And it was much easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But even after they've redone the website, still, sometimes it is challenging to find certain bits of information. And I know they're working on it.
Mm-hmm.
Transparency is important. Director Briswell's mentioned it several times. Amy, was there any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with this evening?
No, just, if anybody has questions or anything about testing or this, the recall, I don't know much about, but as far as what the procedure is going to be, I'm happy to answer any questions I can related to the MRA issues. And again, it's not real till I hear it from the MRA is where I stand right now. And I'm looking forward to their guidance on how I can start helping.
Well, thanks for rejoining us. We're just wrapping things up. Did you want to have a final word? Want to let us know a little bit more about anything?
Yeah. Why are we surprised? I mean, I always.
Well, that kind of encapsulates, some of my thoughts, but there's a process in place. Like there's this bad history. There's a lot of circumstantial things, a lot of things being hinted at, leaning toward all that kind of stuff. But there is a process in place. It's going to reveal some things, and we'll have to roll with it. Right. But this seems like a big deal, man. I mean,
it affects a lot of people's lives.
Yeah,
it does. It's a headache for. I mean, if you figure what they say, 400 retailers, so 400 times the number of employees and everybody in that structure times the growers times all that. I mean, you're if it's 60% of the industry, then just what's 60% of the industry look like? It's such a huge inconvenience for innocent people, in a sense, for people who have zero stake in it in that sense, but have all the stake in the outcome of it.
And I have extra empathy for a lot of the craft grows that tested all of their product there, and now it's all frozen, and they're in a terrible situation. If you're a giant organization and you've got other rooms you can harvest and test with somebody else next week, that's one thing. But for the smaller, more craft grows, this could be devastating.
Outdoor too, Amy, because you can't regrow another outdoor. So if your entire outdoor crop was tested through Virtus and it's now on hold because this went from September all the way through till November, which is, oftentimes testing after Croptober.
Exactly.
So that makes it an extremely unfortunate time of year for this to happen also.
Exactly.
So I can have a lot of sympathy for those specific people too. Everybody involved. It seems like a massive headache. But again, I cannot believe that this would have been undertaken if it had not been clearly mandated by facts and information. Now, whether or not those facts and information warranted this, that's for a court to decide. But right now, I'm as Jamie mentioned, these particular people don't have a great history. We were suspicious of them for a long time, and when your suspicions get proven right, it's sort of hard to not believe what you just saw. So, anyway,
yeah.
Amy, how can people find out more about ABKO Labs?
So you can reach us at info@abkolabs.com, which is ABKO Labs plural.com, or at 248-505-1429. we are making sure we've got staff ready to help with whatever needs are out there, and we're ready, willing, and able.
An extra discount if you say heard it on Jazz Cabbage Cafe. Is that what?
Of course.
I'm going to ask Paul Tylenda for the same thing on legal fees. So, you know,
Always.
Amy, thanks for being here. Paul, how can people learn more about what you do, sir?
TylendaLaw.com. Just Google. Everything's Google now. Just Google it.
That's right.
T-Y. It's like Tylenol, like my mom used to tell me growing up. TYLENDALAW.com or Paul at Tylenda Law. Call me, text me, carrier pigeon, smoke signals, whatever.
Yeah. Jamie, it was your idea to do this program, and I'm really glad that you decided that. It was great to run with this concept. I always love it when you wear the White Panther hat too, because that's a John Sinclair thing. Rock on. So,
I'm
thanks
not
again.
really that cold. A lot of people think that I'm cold.
Well, of course you're not cold. You're bundled up like an Eskimo. So.
Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with it.
But thanks again. What else you got,
Thank
Jay?
you. Yeah, thank you.
Yep, that's it. I wanted to kind of straighten out what we do know about it, and we end up kind of thinking that we know some stuff, and that it's involved in a process, and more information's coming our way.
Yeah.
But I'm still kind of struck by how huge the amount, just the volume that's involved in all this. This is huge.
Yep. And it's a 3-month stretch from 2 different labs. So that just compounds everything. This is not a single batch recall. This is unprecedented as far as I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks again, everyone. Jazz Cabbage Cafe.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Yep.
you.
What a
Thank you,
great
guys.
show. Watch us on YouTube. Check us out on Pandora or Alexa or any of the podcasting services, and watch us on Roku on the Pro Cannabis Media television station, broadcasting 4 to 6 p.m. every Tuesday Eastern Standard Time.
Thank
See you
you.
guys.
Thanks, guys.
Back Tuesday. Paul will be with us on Tuesday again too.
Yep.
Awesome. Can't wait.
See you guys.